Welcome everyone to the LEANS webinar. LEANS is Learning About Neurodiversity at School, and this is our launch event and information session specifically targeted at educators who might like to use LEANS in their classroom. If we could go to the next slide, please, Alyssa. So before we dive into things, we just wanted to say a huge thank you and give recognition to the amazing team of people who have made LEANS happen. It's been an absolute labour of love, this project, and we have been incredibly fortunate, especially to have Dr. Alyssa Alcorn leading the LEANS project. She is an exceptional human being. I have had a wonderful time working with her for the last 2 and a bit years. And there is absolutely no doubt that LEANS is a significantly more impressive and high quality product than it would have been had anyone else been in that role. We are all completely indebted to Alyssa. I won't say any more because she's got to do some presenting and I don't want her to get embarrassed before she does her presenting. Alyssa has been ably supported by a wonderful team of researchers, of educators, of a very neurodiverse team, people bringing lots of professional and lived experience to the table, both at the research level, project level, but also within our participatory design team who helped us kind of create the template of what LEANS would be and what it was going to do. We also want to send out a special thank you to Claire Hubbard, who was our completely amazing illustrator for LEANS, and you're going to see lots of her wonderful drawings in the slides today. And as noted on the slide, full credits, including how to cite LEANS and so on, is available on the website, and thanks to all of our funders are on there as well. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick overview of the structure for this afternoon, what we're talking about is the LEANS program, a resource pack that has been created for mainstream schools so that primary school teachers can introduce the concept of neurodiversity to children aged around 8 to 11 years old. So once I shut up, I'll hand over to Alyssa, who will give you an introduction to the LEANS resources. And integrated into that, you're going to hear from one of our participatory design team members, Sarah Douglas, and also from one of our research team, Sarah McGeown, who'll be talking specifically about how we've used stories in LEANS and giving you a preview of one of the stories from the pack, which I think you'll be really excited by. I absolutely love the stories. Then it comes back to me. I'll talk a little bit how we've evaluated LEANS, whether we think it works. And then we'll hear from another of our participatory design team members, Chris Rigby, and finally back to Alyssa to think about, the sort of practical next steps, in terms of integrating LEANS with the curriculum, making a decision about whether to use it in your school, in your classroom. And that takes us to about 5 o'clock, and then we will transition into the Q&A session and have half an hour to get through as many of your questions as we possibly can. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Alyssa.
Thank you very much, Sue. Oops. So again, thank you so much for so many of you joining us, and I'm glad that so many people are keen to talk about neurodiversity education today. So I want to give you a heads up that in this overview, we're going to be going broad and try to say a little bit of everything about LEANS rather than going deep into any of the details. Our project website does have more information about what LEANS is, and many of the things you're going to hear me mention in this section. And then our teacher handbook within the resource download says even more. So there are places available now to get more information. So what is LEANS? We keep saying LEANS, and as Sue said, that stands for Learning About Neurodiversity at School. And this is a tool that tries to do pretty much what it says on the box. It's a new resource pack for introducing neurodiversity concepts to mainstream primary classes in a way that's meant to be accessible and engaging and also age appropriate. For the current version of LEANS, our target age group is 8 to 11 years. And this is a whole class teacher-delivered curriculum. And we're recommending that you spread it out over approximately 1 school term, though you could do a bit longer. And one of the main resources that we make available in our downloadable resource pack is what's called the LEANS Teacher Handbook. And this is really a training course in the book. It's meant to get you started with teaching this topic, even if you've never taught anything about neurodiversity before. So neurodiversity is quite a big idea, and people don't always define it in the same way. So let's have a look at how LEANS defines it in our pupil-facing materials. So we use the definition that neurodiversity means that we are all different in how we think, feel, and learn because our brains process information differently. Neurodiversity includes everyone because everyone has a brain. So we really try to position the idea of neurodiversity as part of other concepts that pupils will already be familiar with. For example, talking about cultural or religious diversity in school, saying this is another type of diversity among human beings. We also really want to stress that there is not one right way to be, but instead multiple equally valid ways of thinking and feeling and doing things. We do also directly introduce pupils to terminology around neurodivergence and neurotypicality. So in terms of the goals of LEANS, we want to try to go beyond that vocabulary or imparting neurodiversity facts. The really big picture goal here is about creating positive changes at school. So following participation in LEANS, we would want pupils and teachers to increase their knowledge of neurodiversity concepts, to create more positive attitudes toward neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and also to increase their positive and inclusive actions in the school community. So different topics and pieces of content within the resource pack connects to these know, think, do goals in different ways. So the resource pack is divided up into 7 topic units. And as you might expect, we start with a unit introducing the general concept of neurodiversity and those terms. We then go on to talking about classroom experiences and differences in people's learning and thinking. Then a unit on communication and miscommunication, one on needs and wants, and especially how those connect to the idea of getting supports in the school context. Then a unit about fairness, and most particularly trying to encourage students toward an equity-based version of fairness, as opposed to a more equality or sameness-based version of fairness. A unit on friendships and relationships, and then a final summative unit that's very reflective and asking people to consider their past and future actions and how these might be impacting other people. So this might not be the list of topics that you expected to see. And how we get to this list is all of us on the team thinking very carefully about some of the ways that children in this age group at school experience the implications of neurodiversity. And then what do we need to talk about to get at those experiences? The answer is not lots of neurons. Instead, we end up talking about things like, that's not fair. How come he gets to do that when I don't? It's your fault. You're doing it wrong, and you're not listening to me. A lot of these very small, concrete interactions and points of friction that often happen when people are different or they don't necessarily understand exactly what's happening in their classroom environment and why. And out of some of these interactions, we get to those topics like a unit on fairness or understanding the difference between wanting and needing something. All of our units combine different types of resource items, and these play complementary roles. So several of our units have videos which are about directly explaining new concepts and vocabulary. This also means, teachers, that you are not on the spot to come up with a child-friendly explanation in front of your class. Every unit also has hands-on activities and discussion. And these are really about experiencing new ideas and making them real. The kind of, I saw that myself factor. Those are closely integrated with our stories about a fictional neurodiverse classroom. And you're going to hear more about stories a little bit later on and see an example. And our stories illustrate individual perspectives and a really wide range of experiences that are present at school. Finally, we've got unit posters, And these are a reminder in the classroom of some of the big ideas. So I'd like now to take a little pause to clarify a few things that LEANS is and isn't that come out of a lot of the questions people have asked us so far. And the first thing that LEANS is not is an intervention for children who might be struggling socially or academically. It is about upskilling the entire class to understand the concept of neurodiversity, but is not about teaching study skills or interpersonal skills. It's also not an anti-bullying program. It does encourage people to reflect on their actions, but should not be used as a bullying intervention at school. For teachers, LEANS also isn't training or top tips about supporting your neurodivergent pupils. It does try to give you a grounding in the concept of neurodiversity and talk through some of the issues and considerations involved in teaching this topic. LEANS also isn't a diagnostic tool. It's not clinical in any way, but going beyond clinical, it's not explicitly trying to encourage anyone to identify themselves as being neurodivergent or neurotypical or anything else. It does show a range of experiences, and we hope that everyone will find something in those experiences that rings true for them. Finally, get this question a lot, LEANS is not only for Scotland. We've had educators from all the UK nations and Ireland contributing at various stages of the development and revision process. So a few more important facts that teachers will need to know here. And the first biggest one is you do not already need to be a neurodiversity expert in order to deliver LEANS. The resource pack includes all the stuff, the handbook, the printouts, the posters, all the stuff, except your professional judgment and experience about what will best fit your pupils. So there's still a certain amount of decision making involved in terms of how you're going to fit LEANS to your own circumstances. In terms of the time requirement, our estimate is spending 1 to 2 hours a week on LEANS over a whole school term, assuming that's 12 or 13 weeks long. So that's about 15 to 19 hours total delivery time. You could easily spread that out over a longer time. Crunching it up to do a shorter time might be a little bit tricky. And I want to stress again here that LEANS is for whole class delivery. This is really, really important. Because neurodiversity is, of course, a property of groups, not individuals. So that means that every single person in your neurodiverse classroom is affected by the implications of neurodiversity. If you were to only pull out a group of pupils, such as pupils who already have diagnoses, that would be a bit like talking about cultural diversity only to people in your community who are from minority groups. It might not be the place with the greatest scope for change in terms of what people know and what they choose to do. So, everything I've talked about so far with LEANS is really the end point of a long development process. How did we actually get here? First of all, we had very open funding, which is quite unusual. We were not pre-committed to exact facts or formats of what we were going to make. We engaged in a participatory design process with a neurodiverse, experienced group of educators. That means that researchers and education professionals were working together to make a huge list of decisions, starting with what does teaching about neurodiversity actually mean for this age group and for a school context? What should people actually know? What are the learning objectives? And then, what do we actually make? Should we write a book? Should we make a board game? What should we do? And of course, what do teachers need to know in order to engage with this topic? After the initial design process, we had a number of later consultation stages with additional teachers and with the wider community. And a lot of that was focused on the acceptability and also the practicality of the emerging plans for the final resource. All that was quite a long process. So I'm gonna skip over the details for now, but there is more information about development on our website. And having said all of that, we're now going to hear from one of our design team members about why she chose to get involved with the LEANS project and why she believes it's so important and potentially impactful to teach about neurodiversity in school. So please welcome Sarah Douglas.
Hello, my name is Sarah Douglas, and I had a late diagnosis of autism, age 42, and an even later diagnosis of ADHD 10 years later. I am proudly neurodivergent, and I'm delighted to have been part of the LEANS project and to be here with you at its launch tonight. I applied to be on the LEANS participatory design team because I thought that it was an important project to be involved in and one that I could contribute to. I trained as a teacher and worked in a mainstream primary school as a learning support assistant with autistic children for 6 years, as well as being able to offer my lived experience of being neurodivergent. The participatory nature of the LEANS project meant that from the planning stage onwards, my professional and personal contributions were genuinely valued and respected. This reflects the team's central ethos that the experiences of educators and neurodivergent people are key to what this resource includes and what it is all about. Upon my return, having taken a break in the middle, I was astonished at the quality and scope of the content that had been produced. This free downloadable resource will, I'm sure, be of huge benefit to primary school teachers, classroom assistants, and students alike. Learning about the equally valid range and diversity of human brains and the different ways in which we learn and experience the world is as important as learning about our cultural and social differences, and is a vital element in being part of an authentically inclusive and kind community. When I was growing up undiagnosed, I knew I was different from my school peers, but because there was no understanding about neurodiversity at the time, I had no idea why, and struggled with bullying and poor mental health as a result. Later, when I was supporting primary-aged autistic children, conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and more were framed in terms of deficit and abnormality, and there were very few resources to effectively support either the children or myself as their educator. I would really have appreciated a resource like LEANS to have been taught when I was at school and to have been available when I was involved in education. I feel that it would have made such a difference to me and the children that I taught, as if there had been more understanding about what neurodiversity is and its importance in an educational environment, then the trajectory of my life may have been very different. Of course, I cannot comment on the outcomes of the children that I spent time with, but my experiences at school impacted on my adult life to the extent that at age 52, I feel as if it is only now that I'm starting to flourish. Even though society is now more aware about different brain wirings like autism, harmful stereotyping is widespread, and there still isn't a great amount of understanding or acceptance. This lack of knowledge poses a real problem for neurodivergent children and can result in damaging outcomes such as exclusion and suicidality, amongst others. However, schools are great places to start changing this situation by teaching about the different ways in which children learn and experience the world, and the LEANS resource would be an effective support in this endeavour. I am an unashamedly LEANS cheerleader, and working on the project has at times felt very personal. Reading through, editing material, and estimating preparation and delivery times has been an emotional exercise for me. The experiences and reactions of some of the neurodivergent characters resonate deeply with my younger self, and I have been left with a strong impression that the LEANS resource gets to the absolute heart of what it means to grow up with a different brain wiring in a world that can be hostile to difference. And it offers ways for the school community to think about these differences so that all children can thrive. I thoroughly recommend LEANS to primary educators, and I encourage you to take a look at this resource to see what a beneficial addition it could be to your curriculum. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for sharing that. And Sarah will also be part of our...
Hello, my name...
Sorry, we're not going to hear you again there. And Sarah will also be part of our extended Q&A session at the end of the day today. One of the things that she specifically mentioned was about the LEANS stories and characters and how they offer a way for school communities to think about differences related to neurodiversity. So in a double bill of Sarah's today, we will now hear from a member of the LEANS research team, Dr. Sarah McGeown, talking about why storytelling is such an important strategy in LEANS, and giving a preview of one of our stories from Unit 1.
Hi, my name is Dr. Sarah McGeown and I'm a member of the LEANS research team. My research interests lie in children's language and literacy development, and I have a particular interest in how books and stories can support positive experiences and outcomes for children and young people. Indeed, stories often reflect the social world that we live in and can provide us with an enriched understanding of ourselves and of others. In addition, stories can introduce children to a wide range of experiences and people, making them a useful tool for exploring our differences. In LEANS, our hands-on activities are integrated with a story about a neurodiverse class of children set in the fictional Bubble Burn Primary School. We use stories to help bring facts to life and to illustrate a range of neurodiverse experiences without singling out any pupils within the classroom. The stories in LEANS don't simply repeat LEANS messages and concepts, but try to show how they really matter in people's daily lives. We use stories because recent research has provided compelling evidence that the information provided in narrative is more easily understood and better recalled than information provided in expository text. Put simply, stories can help children to understand new ideas and concepts, and importantly, can also help them to understand themselves and others better. It was September and the school term had started. Mr. Oliver's new class had settled into room 106. They quickly found out that he was nice, but not so nice that no one ever listened or followed the rules. On Friday, Mr. Oliver thought they should finish the week with a game. The game was called Would You Rather? He would ask a funny question and people had to vote for one of the two options by going to stand on either side of the classroom. Sometimes everyone knew their answer right away. There would be lots of laughing as people ran from side to side as new questions were called out. Other times, members of the class had a hard time deciding, and there might be a few children left wavering in the middle of the classroom after the others had chosen. Mr. Oliver called out, "Okay, here's the next one. Ready?" He read, "Would you rather go to a school where no students or teachers were allowed to talk, even at lunchtime? Or would you rather go to a school where you could talk, shout and sing as much as you wanted all the time?" Most of the children scrambled around to the talking side of the classroom. Declan, wearing his ear defenders, led the way over to the quiet side of the school, and 6 or 7 people followed. 2 were left in the middle, Simon and Ibrahim. Immediately, Rashida reminded them, "In this game you have to choose one, you can't stay in the middle." The 2 boys continued to stand in the middle and look from side to side. The people on each side of the room got tired of waiting and began whispering to each other. Simon began to look pink and embarrassed. After looking around, he finally inched over to the bigger group of people on the talking side, even though he privately thought that maybe a no-talking school might be better. Ibrahim was still in the middle, all alone and looking uncertain. "Well, Ibrahim," said Mr. Oliver encouragingly, "I know it's a tricky choice. Which type of school would you rather go to?" Mr. Oliver's question brought the attention of the class back to Ibrahim, who was usually called Ibi. Ibi's best friend Jack was over on the talking side. "Come on, Ibi," Jack called. "You never stop talking, and you wouldn't be able to tell any of your jokes. You couldn't survive in a quiet school." The rest of the group laughed in agreement. Ibi smiled, a bit uncomfortably, and shook his head. "I'm still deciding." "Come on," Jack repeated impatiently. Now others joined in too. "Hey, Ibi, this side's the best one." Mr. Oliver said loudly, "Don't worry about it, Ibi. How about we all come back to the middle and then try another? There's 2 more." Unfortunately, the class was getting carried away. Everyone was calling out from both sides of the room. Over the hubbub, Anna Jade was the loudest, almost yelling at Ibrahim. "You're just pretending you can't decide to get attention. It's always all about you." Now Ibi looked truly upset. Almost crying, he said, "Stop it. When it's all noisy in class, I can't think or do my work or anything. I'm not faking. I really can't decide. Stop." Someone at the back mimicked, "Ooh, I can't decide," in a high-pitched voice, and people around the room laughed and started repeating it. Morag was silent, but felt herself going red. She felt horrible for Ibrahim and knew what it was like to be laughed at, but she didn't know what to do. She didn't want to be next. "Okay, that's enough," said Mr. Oliver, striding into the centre next to Ibrahim. "Come on, everyone, back here. Let's just do the next question." People reluctantly started towards him, but as they did, Jack had to have the last word. "You know I'm right, Ibi, and that you would have picked the talking side, with us." Ibrahim snapped. He screamed, "Shut up!" right in Jack's face. His hands were balled up like he wanted to hit something. "Shut up! I can decide for myself." Jack stepped back, shocked. Ibi always laughed and joked about everything. It was strange and a little alarming to see him suddenly get angry. Mr. Oliver stepped in, holding out his hands to keep them apart. "Jack, Ibi, enough." The class went quiet, except for Ibi, who was crying. The teaching assistant, Mrs. Adeyemi, beckoned from the door. "Ibi, let's go and get a drink of water now." The class watched him go. Some people were smirking and nudging each other, but others looked uncomfortable and worried. Jack seemed uncertain about what had just happened, and how joking around with Ibi, just like always, had gone so wrong. This story ends by reporting Mr. Oliver and Mrs. Adeyemi's after-school discussion. They agree that what happened wasn't okay, but what should they do? Bubbleburn Primary already talks about differences in languages and cultures, but not so much about the differences in how people think and learn. They decide that doing some lessons on neurodiversity would help their class understand each other better and perhaps make some different choices in the future.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. I do just want to let you know that this is a special story video that we created just for the launch. Story time in class will look a bit different. The stories are illustrated, but we don't have videos like these for all of them. Speaking of school and story time in school, I'm going to hand over to Professor Sue Fletcher-Watson, who will tell us about when LEANS went to school last year for our evaluation study.
Thank you, Alyssa. I'm absolutely gripped by those stories every time I hear them, and I hope you all were too. I noticed that the chat went very quiet, which is a good sign. Everyone very attentively listening. So yes, we took LEANS into schools to do an evaluation to find out if it was any good. Next slide, please, Alyssa. So the evaluation focused on 4 elements. Next slide, please. The first element was the feasibility of delivering LEANS. So we really wanted to find out, is it practical for teachers to deliver? Do schools want to use it? And also, be able to get a better estimate of how long it would take. Next slide, please. We were interested in accessibility as well. Have we given teachers all the information that they need? And we were particularly concerned to make sure that both kind of newly qualified and less experienced teachers, but also very kind of established and experienced teachers would have, the right kind of information, and that we were neither expecting too much nor kind of talking down to experienced educators. Next slide, please. The third element of the evaluation was thinking about the safety. We're talking about a potentially difficult topic, a very personal thing for lots of people in the classroom, and we want to be absolutely sure that we are minimizing any risk that anyone is upset or finds the process difficult. And of course, after all of that, we need to know if it's working. And the reason I've put impact last is because there's no point, in our opinion, in producing something that has a big impact if it's not also feasible, accessible, and safe for the people who are using it. Next slide, please. So what did we do? First of all, we recruited 4 primary schools with 8 classrooms who wanted to take part in the evaluation. They were all mainstream schools in Scotland, though, as Alyssa has said, LEANS is not just for Scotland, but that's where we're based. And it was a mixture of small, rural and larger urban schools. The design of the evaluation was a simple pre-post design. So we collected some quiz data from children before and after completing LEANS. And we used measures that we had created ourselves with a mixture of multiple choice and agreement scale responses. So, marking on a line from kind of disagree to agree. And I'll call those time points baseline before LEANS and outcome after they did LEANS. It was also a mixed methods evaluation. So we captured qualitative information from teacher diaries and by interviewing a subset of children. And the final point, Alyssa, if you bring it up, was that all of this happened during COVID. So it was during the autumn term last year, from August to December 2021, when schools were open, but there was a huge amount of COVID-related disruption, as you will recall. Next slide, please. So who took part? About 160 pupils were exposed to LEANS, and about 140 of them completed it all the way to the end. But only a subset of those children took part in our research evaluation because they had consent from their parents for us to have access to their quiz data. Most of that sample were white British, the slight majority were female, they were all native or fluent English speakers, and about 18% of them, according to parents, had some kind of additional support need at school. In terms of teachers, there were 9 classroom teachers who took part, so 8 classes but 9 teachers because there was one emergency switchover. And they had varying levels of experience in terms of years since graduation. And while all of them were keen and enthusiastic and dedicated, they weren't neurodiversity or indeed diversity in general experts at the point that they enrolled in the study. Next slide, please. So what were our results? So thinking about acceptability and feasibility first, we got amazingly positive feedback. As this teacher quote illustrates, it's been a great resource where pupils have enjoyed the activities. But this was in the face of major COVID-related disruption that caused staff and pupil absences in all of the classes. And one of our 8 classes withdrew because of the sheer insurmountable challenges of those COVID-related disruptions. Next slide, please. Something I think is really impressive actually though is that across all of those classes that were taking part in LEANS, I don't think we ever had a teacher calling us up saying, I don't understand how I meant to administer this task or this activity or what I meant to do next. So I think that's a huge credit to Alyssa and the quality of the instruction she produced. We did get some robust constructive feedback on the stories, essentially that they were a bit too long, and we were able to accommodate that feedback in the final version of LEANS. So we cut about 28% of the story length without losing any of the plot details that are obviously important for learning. We got revised estimates for the delivery time that are more accurate and updated instructions for teachers and tasks across the whole package. Next slide, please. In terms of safety, so we did these interviews with 7 children who took part in LEANS, and we found 4 kind of main themes from that. So one really strong theme was that pupils felt that it was just a regular part of school. There's some quotes here on the slide. I just kind of did it. And I think that's a really positive thing because actually we don't want LEANS to feel weird or exceptional in relation to other kinds of classroom practice and teaching materials. So I think it's really positive that pupils took it in their stride and it felt like a normal part of the school day. It was, however, very fun. So we got some wonderful quotes from students, if you could bring them up, Alyssa, thank you, telling us how much they enjoyed the activities, which was obviously wonderful. There was also good evidence that pupils gained new insights from LEANS, both in terms of new knowledge about neurodiversity, but also developing new intended actions. If you could bring up the next slide, Alyssa, then we can see a quote to illustrate that. And finally, all pupils engaged with the idea of differences between people. So this is a lovely quote, everyone is different and you don't have to be the same as everyone else. Like you can just be you, which is a wonderful piece of learning for a pupil to take away. Next slide, please. There's also this lovely quote from a teacher. So one of the things we were really wanting to pay attention to is whether parents, especially parents of neurodivergent children, would have any concerns. But this teacher reported that they were very happy that this concept was being explored in class. Next slide, please. So what about impact then? So we think we're doing something safe, we think we're doing something feasible and acceptable. We also think that it had the desired impact. So in terms of understanding the definition of neurodiversity, we had an increase from less than 20% to 60% of pupils understanding the correct definition of neurodiversity. Next slide, please. More broadly in terms of neurodiversity knowledge, on the quiz that children took at outcome, the mean score was 5 out of 8 quiz questions. Children showed an effective grasp of the concepts that were introduced in LEANS. Next slide. In terms of the attitudes and actions, right, so not so much the knowledge as the think and do parts of the programme, we also saw a significant improvement in the relevant quiz scores and an increase in children endorsing attitudes and actions that were aligned with LEANS in response to multiple choice questions. Teachers talked about individual children having a penny drop moment in relation to LEANS, and this child told us that he discovered that people are different and shouldn't feel that they have to change in the open-ended questions at the end of the quiz. Next slide, please. There was one result that was a surprise to us, so we predicted an increase in agreement with items like this one. So the statement is, in my class, most people are kind and friendly to people who are different than they are. We actually found a decrease across the group. Next slide, please, Alyssa. And the way we interpret that is that we're wondering if children became more reflective or analytical as a result of engaging with LEANS. So our interpretation is that even though children weren't agreeing with that statement more, actually, if what that reflects is an evolution of their views and a more nuanced understanding of the experiences of other children in the classroom, then that's a really positive development and a really important engagement with concepts of neurodiversity. Next slide, please. So our conclusions from this. We think that LEANS is feasible and accessible, and because we got some constructive feedback, it's even more so after that evaluation phase. We identified no safety concerns in our evaluation, but I would emphasise that safety planning is still important for every school, and that's something that Alyssa is going to pick up in the last part of the webinar today. Next slide, please. We got significant increases in what children know about neurodiversity, also significant changes in what they think about learning and diversity in their class. And as I noted, that's not a simple story, but we think it's an important one. And we got significant improvements in children's intended actions in relation to neurodiversity in their class. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to a wonderful recording made by one of our participatory design team members, Chris Rigby, who will give a little bit of his professional and personal perspective on LEANS.
Hi, my name is Chris Rigby, and I work as the Director of Special Educational Needs and Disabilities for Outwood Academy Grange Trust, which is a multi-academy trust in the north of England that covers 5 local authorities. My role is extremely varied, from delivering mental health first aid England youth programme to developing effective systems and processes that align with the graduated response to special educational needs. I previously taught in specialist and mainstream settings, as well as worked for a local authority within the statutory assessment team for children and young people with complex needs. I became involved with LEANS in 2020 as one of an 8-member design team. I was really keen to be involved because neurodiversity is something that I'm very passionate about. Our main goal was to determine what to make for the LEANS resources, and most importantly, really embrace and embed the why behind it. In particular, I was closely involved in the unit on communication and understanding, which explores and validates how all ways of communicating are useful and important. Many years ago, I myself was one of these pupils, and the classroom could be a tricky place to navigate on a day-to-day basis, and I presented with many different behavioural and attention problems. This led to years of aimless consequences, negative comments and reports from teachers, and led to a feeling that something was wrong with me and that I was not understood. This creates a perpetual cycle of shame. Fairly recently, however, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I now look back at my life through a different window of the world, with much more love, empathy, and acceptance for the younger version of myself. I now understand my own neurological differences, and more importantly, the why behind why they make me do things sometimes slightly differently, or sometimes mean that I need something different. And that actually this isn't something to be ashamed of, but actually makes me who I am, makes me unique. Had LEANS been available and implemented back when I was at school, and my teachers and classmates knew more about ADHD, I feel that my experiences at school could have been very different. By exploring those key concepts, such as the different variations of the brain and how this impacts on learning and thinking differently, and communicating and understanding, and different types of friendships, whilst exploring wants versus needs, and whether someone receiving something different is fair or not, are all crucial areas that really broaden our understanding and enable us to accept individual difference. I feel that the LEANS programme can make a massive difference to the mindsets and language used by pupils, staff, and parents through memorable and relatable activities that change and challenge and reframe our own window of the world. In England, LEANS would slot seamlessly into the relationship, sex, and health education curriculum, and aligns very much with the key themes of forging respectful and caring relationships and supporting the mental well-being of children and young people. These are both absolutely critical for a generation of children and young people who are increasingly experiencing unprecedented challenges and pressures, whilst always being at risk of feeling lonely or not conforming in some way. The LEANS lesson content will give them the knowledge and capability to better understand and accept who they are, whilst developing empathy, acceptance, curiosity, and an allegiance to their peers' unique differences. For these reasons, I'm extremely keen for my own multi-academy trust to adopt LEANS for the next academic year, and I will be proposing this to my management and team in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that. And we have a short update, which is that since we had that conversation a few weeks ago, Chris has spoken to his Academy Trust and they've agreed to adopt LEANS for next year, which is very exciting news. And Chris is here today for the extended Q&A at the end of the session. So Chris mentioned how he thinks LEANS would fit with the curriculum in England, which is very useful to know. In this final presentation section, I'm going to take a step back a bit more and think about how LEANS fits with the existing curriculum more generally. Then I'll go into some safety issues that teachers need to consider. And finally, we will have a look at what's next, because even though we've released the LEANS resources, LEANS isn't over yet. So, linking LEANS to the curriculum. As far as we know, neurodiversity is not yet in any official curricula in the UK nations or Ireland or anywhere else in the world, though there may be some individual schools who are doing some work in this area. However, it does clearly connect to inclusion and well-being priorities that many schools have across school systems, especially as we're still in this COVID recovery period, the aftermath of all the disruption that Sue mentioned in relation to the school study in 2021. So LEANS does connect to these priorities around health and well-being, inclusion, equality, safety at school. It also links to current specific topics that are being taught, like citizenship and human rights are a big one, but also to the visual and performing arts and to literature and even more. There's a lot of different things in the pack. Finally, it's an opportunity for pupils to work on some really important emotional and learning skills. For example, the idea of metacognition, thinking about our own and others' thinking, or self-advocacy, understanding and working on verbalizing what we may need. So we think that even though LEANS currently isn't on the books, that there really is a lot of connection to what's already happening in schools right now. It's now time to be a little more serious for just a moment. So far, we've tried to convince you that LEANS, that teaching and learning about neurodiversity is important and can impact real people's lives, and also that the tool that we've developed is practical and acceptable in real schools. However, there's a really important caveat here, which is that LEANS isn't going to be the right tool for everyone right now. And what I mean by that is that it won't be practical and it won't be low risk in every single school setting. So I'll say a little bit more about why it is that we say that. And the first biggest thing is that teaching any diversity-related topic is about real people's lives. It's sensitive and it's not going to be risk-free. We do think there are some risks that are specific to neurodiversity. And the first one would be people intentionally or unintentionally using their new knowledge to hurt other people, for example, to bully them. You might possibly have increasing rather than decreasing marginalization of neurodivergent children or staff members in your school, or might increase rather than decrease negative attitudes. That's a risk. Another would be simply that people feel distressed by thinking or talking about this topic. We do think, however, that these risks that we've just mentioned are commensurate with the risks of teaching other diversity or social issues topics in schools. They're not something extreme and far different than what's happening now. Throughout the LEANS development process, we have worked really hard on trying to mitigate these risks as far as possible. And one bit of that is our no singling out principle that the teacher handbook discusses in quite some detail. And really what that means is that we don't want individual pupils, especially neurodivergent pupils, to be on the spot at any point during the activities and feel pushed to disclose their personal experiences or other information they may not want to share. And this is a big reason that we use the stories that you already heard about. They allow us to be quite specific about what people may be experiencing at school or finding easy or difficult or exciting, but without putting anyone in your real class on the spot. Also, we worked very hard to provide safety and ethics guidance for teachers. So a little bit more about those safety planning tools. At the point where you might be deciding whether or not LEANS is a good choice for your school or your classroom, the teacher handbook includes some more detailed information on what the possible risks and ethics issues might be that you need to think about. We also offered a structured self-evaluation exercise in the teacher handbook. That's a set of 18 yes or no questions to help have a look at whether LEANS would be practical and low risk in your particular circumstances. If you've decided that you think LEANS is a good fit for your classroom, there's a bit more support still. And there's a whole chunk of the teacher handbook that's a guide to safety planning for classroom staff. What are the decisions and preparations that you need to make ahead of time so that you're ready to teach these topics? And especially to do things like have sensitive conversations with pupils or other staff members or potentially parents. We also have tips in there for editing the materials if you may need to do that. We know that some of the situations in the LEANS stories of the materials might be a little bit too close to home for some classrooms. So you should have the capacity to change some of those things if you need to do that to make sure your pupils will feel safe. So on a cheerier note, let's now have a think about what is coming up next for LEANS. So if you've had a look around our website, you may have already spotted a bit of what's next. And I'm very pleased to share that we've secured an ESRC impact grant for an impact project following on from LEANS, which is the LEANS Community or LEANS Seed project in partnership with the Salveson Mind Room Center. And this project is really about making LEANS sustainable in the long term so that people continue to discover it and adopt it and keep using it in schools around Scotland and the UK and even further abroad. It's really about moving the momentum and the expertise from us on the research team out to all of you in the community, because we're not able to do everything forever. So the very first strand of this project is about families. And we're creating some resources here specifically for families, including fact sheets about neurodiversity in the LEANS resources and template materials to help families propose LEANS to their child's school, and which I hope will be of interest because I've already had quite a few email questions about this. And those template materials could help you explain the possible benefits of teaching about neurodiversity to help convince a school who maybe isn't already well-informed or keen on this issue that it might be a good thing to adopt and fit with their existing priorities. And more information is coming later this year through our mailing list and the project website. The other strand of LEANS is all about educators. People have kept asking us about LEANS training, so we are setting up a cascading scheme, sometimes also called a train the trainer scheme, and this will be called the LEANS Champions. And champions, once they're trained, will be a source of local help, someone you can actually call or email who could be able to provide help to other school staff, model good practice, and be a cheerleader for schools in their areas adopting and continuing to use LEANS. And because this is a cascading scheme, and the training course for the champions will be focused on helping them learn some of the expertise that's currently held in the research and design teams and equipping them to then train other people. We will also be setting up an online network for any educators interested in LEANS. There's a page already about what we know so far about the champion scheme on our website, and an expression of interest form if you'd like to hear more. So thank you very much to the 23 people who already expressed interest. You can get the form and the information on the site there. So we're now very, very close to the end of the information session. And before I hand back to Sue, I wanted to draw your attention to some of the limits of LEANS. And yes, LEANS has limits. And the first one is simply what it sets out to do. It is about introducing the concept of neurodiversity. It focuses on one specific age group and one specific type of school context. So we really hope that adopting this resource will be opening a process of longer-term conversations and reflections for participating classes. No one resource can say everything about a topic as complicated as neurodiversity or include every possible type of experience. Even if we could, there's limitations on classroom time and how long the average 8-year-old is willing to pay attention. Neurodiversity is also a live and growing topic. People are expanding it and testing it and questioning it all the time. So it's also like trying to hit a moving target in that respect. So I do really want to stress that while we think LEANS is potentially a very valuable tool, it is never meant to be the last word about neurodiversity or even about teaching neurodiversity at primary school level. And I really think that we will all benefit when more resources eventually become available with different points of view on this topic and a different approach that schools could adopt. So with that, I'd also like to say that we have heard lots of feedback from the community that people are keen for us to expand LEANS to either younger or older age groups. We are actively looking at that and seeking funding. So please do stay tuned for the future there. So with that, I'm going to pass back to Sue to wrap us up and introduce how the question and answer session will work.
Hello, hang on, let me do this thing. Okay, now I think you can see me instead of Alyssa. Right, sorry. So hopefully over the course of the last hour or so, we have given you a clear impression that the LEANS resources are needed in our schools, that they are a high quality resource and that they are available for you for free and wherever you are. We would love for you to keep in touch with us by joining our mailing list. See the contact page on the website. I've been putting links in the chat throughout, so you should be able to scroll around in there. And just a reminder for anyone who wasn't here right at the beginning, we will share this recording along with the links to the LEANS pages afterwards as well. So if you're listening on the move or whatever, don't worry, you won't miss the opportunity to get that info. But for now, let's move to our Q&A phase. If I could have the next slide, please, Alyssa. Oh, I wanted to say something about ITACOM. I'd completely forgotten. So briefly, if you are super excited about neurodiversity and would like to think about neurodiversity in other contexts as well as in mainstream primary school classrooms, then you might like to come to the conference that we're putting on in Edinburgh in March 2023, which is called It Takes All Kinds of Minds, or ITACOM for short, and you can go to itacom.org if you're curious to know more. It's going to be a really diverse conference with a lot of perspectives that'll be very relevant to education, healthcare, social care, communities, and so on. And we'll be hearing a little bit more about LEANS at that conference, but also about lots of other neurodiversity relevant research and practice and lived experience. Now I would like the next slide. I would like to thank you all for paying attention. Thank everyone again who's been involved in creating LEANS. Look at this beautiful illustration from Claire Hubbard, and then move on to tell you who our Q&A panel are going to be. So I will be chairing the panel, and you can direct your questions to Alyssa Alcorn, who's been presenting today, Sarah McGeown, who read our story and is another member of the research team, and also Chris Rigby and Sarah Douglas, both parts of our Educator design team, and both of them you heard from in videos earlier today as well. I see there's already plenty of questions in the Q&A. If you haven't posted yet, you can do. Please don't post in the chat. Please post in the Q&A specifically. That'll help me keep track of the questions. You can direct your question to someone specific, but if you don't, I will try and pick out a suitable person. And just apologies to anyone whose questions we don't get to. We'll do our very, very best in the next half hour. So let's stop sharing the slides, I think, and bring up our panel. If you could bring up your cameras. Thank you very much, everybody. And I'll make that a gallery view so hopefully everyone can see all of us. Perfect. Okay, where shall we start? Goodness, so many great questions. This is a good question for Chris, I think, because you have some experience of this. The questioner is asking, do you have suggestions as to how to present this to administrators to get buy-in to the programme?
Yeah, I can certainly share sort of how I approached it. So I arranged to have 15 minutes at one of our team meetings where I'd be able to basically pitch the LEANS resources and then just shared just a few slides and just talked it through as to, you know, the why behind it, and also the how it could be feasible, because I think that's always a bit of a concern, you know, because curriculums are so packed. It's just exploring actually how can this be woven into the curriculum, and also thinking about what positive impact that could have in terms of the proactive nature of doing that, because and also thinking about with the linking into parent hubs and things like that in children's centres in the future, was looking at the potential to branch out and start exploring that with parents as well, to really open up those discussions. So yeah, it was just 15 minutes and then just exploring it, and actually the content and the nature of the activities sort of really sell themselves.
Thank you, Chris. That was perfect. Question for Sarah Douglas. I wonder, so I know that your engagement with research extends beyond the LEANS project, so I thought this might be a good one for you. The question is, do you see this as an area that could be developed for use outside of educational settings, for example, as a psychoeducational component in clinical work following an assessment? Do you want to give that one a go?
You know what? I was just thinking exactly that when Chris was talking, because actually I think these kinds of resources can be adapted further afield, most definitely. I know there are plans afoot to extend it to a secondary school kind of setting, or maybe even further education. But I think they could be very, very useful for post-diagnostic support services. I know we have one in Bristol called BAS, and I think that's where I am, Bristol. And I do think it would be very adaptable for these kinds of things. And also, I've worked in the medical field as well, and I do think that these kinds of resources could be very, very helpful for staff for when neurodivergent people come into the clinic, whether it's in a community setting or a more acute setting. So they've got a much better idea of the length and breadth, or at least a taster of the kinds of experiences and support that patients would require. So yes, I think this is, I do bang on about this, but this is a superb thing, and I do think that it has got huge potential to be adapted for many other settings. Does that begin to answer the question?
I think that's perfect, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now a question for Alyssa. I think there is a lot of interest in whether we have plans to make versions of LEANS for other age groups. Sarah also mentioned that briefly. In particular, people are wondering about LEANS for older secondary school pupils, but also for younger children in kind of preschool and reception classes. I wonder if you can cover both of those.
Okay, I'll have a go. Yes, so first of all, to everyone who's been interested in other age groups, we hear you, and we're trying to take the earliest steps toward that. So I know not everyone will be familiar with research funding, but the very short explanation is we need to pay people for their time. Researchers, artists, people with lived experience, that needs money. And that means writing lots of paperwork to apply for money. So the steps that we've been able to take so far are to start talking to educators and community members about what might be needed for different age groups and to what extent we might be able to adapt the resources we have now. So last fall, a PhD student, Rebecca Smeichel, helped lead some focus groups and interviews with secondary school educators. And a really interesting thing that came out of that was people said, we really think early secondary school might be a good target for sort of a LEANS 2, because pupils are transitioning into that new environment, they're forming new relationships, they're setting up a lot of the patterns of interaction with each other and staff that they then might carry through the rest of secondary school. At least those educators we already talked to then were a bit concerned that trying to tackle an older age group, maybe catching them when they're 16, might be a bit late in terms of changing some people's attitudes. Though I know not everyone will agree with that. So it's quite possible that we might be targeting early secondary school first if we were able to get some funding. Now, thinking about a younger age group, early primary, reception, maybe even before kids are coming into primary school, obviously children have really different abilities and different attention span at that age, so we need quite a different strategy. Something that is much more active, much more hands-on, much more play-based, and potentially is even something that people might be doing at home with their families. So we haven't really explored that space in a lot of details yet, other than knowing it might be quite hard to directly adapt a lot of the content we have now. We might need to make something that looks quite different in order to get at those really core know, think, and do goals for a younger age group.
That's perfect. Thank you, Alyssa. I am going to come back to Chris, I think, with the next question. So the questioner is asking, do you think there are any advantages or disadvantages to a neurodivergent teacher speaking openly about their own experiences as part of the delivery of the LEANS material?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I personally would say yes, particularly for the upper key stage 2. So Yes, I actually, now I think about it, yeah, age 8 to 11. I think it's very powerful to actually share lived experience, and I think that I think that's for any teacher though, to see, for them to see their teacher as being open and allowing themselves to be vulnerable as well. I think that's a really really good as part of a role model, and to sort of share those lived experiences whilst delivering it is, I think, really powerful. That children, regardless of their own neurodivergence or not, to be able to see that their teacher, who they'll hold in this really high esteem, is being so open about it, can only raise the profile and acceptance as well. I think that's really powerful, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. That's wonderful. Question now for Sarah McGeown. I think I'm going to pose this one to you. The questioner is wondering, do you think it would be better to deliver LEANS with a new class immediately in September, or wait and do it with a more established class in term 2? I would be really interested to know what you think of that.
I think it would be good to start from the beginning of a new school year, while the students are just beginning to get to know each other, and perhaps not right from the beginning of the start of the year, but perhaps a few weeks into it as well. As Alyssa said earlier on, I think it can be delivered over the course of a school term, but it might also be extended beyond that as well. And I think some of it's often about consolidating and going over messages that they may have learned in the earlier term too. So I think starting something in the second half of a school year really doesn't give an opportunity for that consolidation to go on and to be talking about things and putting things into practice later in the year.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you. Alyssa, someone here says, stunning work. Isn't that nice?
Thank you so much.
There is also a question, which is, can we talk more about plans or funding or potential collaborations for LEANS in other countries, and particularly interested in non-weird countries, so, you know, outside Europe, North America, etc.
Okay. So I think the short answer to that question is we have not done anything yet, but our inbox is open if anyone has a specific idea about a particular country and how that kind of adaptation might be funded. This is a good point to mention our terms of use, which are on the website. And I know terms of use sounds scary, but we've done our best to include a really clear statement of what that means for teachers and schools and people who want to use the resource. And that says, yes, you would be allowed to translate the LEANS resources for personal use, like in your own school, but you wouldn't be able to then publicly distribute the translation. The situation would be different if you were working in partnership with us and we basically licensed an official translated version of LEANS in whatever the context is. I think there'd probably also need to be some other adaptations as well. For example, some aspects of the British school context depicted in the stories might not make a lot of sense when ported to another very different country. So there might also need to be changes to the stories, to the illustrations, and various other things. So I think it would be doable, but it wouldn't necessarily be straightforward, and probably would take a chunk of money to work with people with local lived experience, with other artists, and so on and so forth, to transform the resources to really be meaningful in another context, not just to be in another language.
Thank you, Alyssa. Sarah Douglas, I'm going to come back to you. The questioner is, although we would not single a young person out during LEANS, excellent, thank you for taking on board that core message. They're wondering, is there advice for what if a young person does choose to share in the middle of a LEANS session? And I wondered what your thoughts were about that, Sarah.
Self-disclosure is always about autonomy, isn't it? And owning your own stuff. And I think the LEANS project has built a hedge around sort of like safety for the pupils and staff involved, personal safety in terms of disclosing or asking questions. And I would think that an educator who's taking LEANS on board would also have a very good idea of how to support a pupil who was, you know, thinking, gosh, this could apply to me and I need to ask questions. And it may be that the educator who would know their class really well would possibly think that it would be more appropriate possibly to have a conversation with that pupil away from the actual, you know, the lesson, as it were. But of course, all these things can be built in. You know, people are going to be curious. They're going to be asking questions, and you know, you may have a lesson, and then the kids go away and start thinking, "Oh, hang on a moment, what does this mean?" And be self-reflective and all the rest of it. And that's when the questions may start happening. So I would say possibly to be prepared for questions as you go along, and for a child to come up to you and ask your advice as their educator who's leading LEANS, but also not to shut a pupil down if they are asking a genuine question and you think that they are safe in that asking that question. I'm not sure that's particularly helpful, because it's very situationally based, and it's based on your knowledge of your classes and your pupils. But questions are always to be encouraged, aren't they? And you know, I really strongly advocate that there are no silly questions attitude, because that's how we learn and that's how we grow. But yes, I do think it's very important to be mindful of your pupils' welfare during this. Does that help?
I think that's great, Sarah, and I completely agree. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're quite clear with LEANS that we think the ideal delivery is with the classroom teacher who knows the class best. Oh, and I see Alyssa has her hand up, so I will hand to Alyssa.
I just wanted to quickly add to Sarah's comment that I think that that's a really good illustration of why we can't give one size fits all advice for LEANS, either in the teacher handbook or later if people are contacting us. But instead, we keep giving people lists of things they may want to think about. Sarah's absolutely right that you may have those questions or disclosures coming up as LEANS go along, which is why we really emphasize a safety planning staff with all of the staff members who work in the classroom before you get going with LEANS, so that everyone's as prepared as possible to handle it. Because of course, what you do and how you react as a teacher to this topic may be even more important than what you actually say. You're a model for how we think about differences.
And back to Sarah again.
I'm not hogging this, I promise. I also think it's about trust in the classroom and the school, the classroom teacher and school environment as well. When I worked in schools, I noticed very much that teachers and educators often felt very that there was a real lack of respect and trust in their profession. And I do think that, and I'm hoping things have changed things there, but I don't think they have really. And I do think LEANS really does kind of encourage the idea of trusting yourselves as educators and honouring, respecting yourselves as educators. Actually, you do have the means and resources to be able to deliver, you know, your own, you know, you've got your own experience, you've got the means and resources to be able to deliver this. And so I think built into this is a level of trust in you, the people who will be delivering this, because you know your pupils better than anybody.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to send this one to the other Sarah now. As you know, LEANS is sort of suitable for children across multiple school years, so kind of P5, P6, P7 in Scotland, Key Stage 2 in England. I'm sorry, I'm less familiar with Northern Ireland and Wales. So the question is, would you deliver LEANS to all those year groups at the same time in one school? What do you think, Sarah?
I suppose this will depend a little bit on school context. I suppose there's benefits of delivering it in the same years at the same time, because then teachers are delivering it at the same time and they have opportunities to talk to each other about how it's going and provide that sort of social support, I think, within school. And I think if you're the only person delivering LEANS within a school, you really don't have that opportunity for those informal discussions with others. So I think it should really be based on a sort of school by school basis and what teachers prefer. But I think having that network of other teachers to talk to and have those informal discussions are really helpful. And so it may be if there's multiple years within multiple classes within a school year that you choose to do it that way.
And I just do a quick follow up. There's a sort of similar question about whether you would repeat LEANS annually. Or just teach it once. I wonder if you could comment on that.
I think it would be important to revisit some of the ideas and cast children's, because they'll forget what happens from year to year, of course. And so maybe revisiting some of the things without necessarily going through all the same activities and the same story content again as well. And of course, having a new class teacher too will be another opportunity for them to see this content through with the support of a different teacher as well. So I don't think there's anything wrong with a bit of repetition. It's just about making sure that it's revisited in a way that's not duplicating it, but maybe adds a little bit more and gets them thinking about things in a different way based on what they'll be doing that year.
Thank you, Sarah. Which one shall I pick up next? Let's take this one for Chris, I think. So there's a few questions here, similar to the first question I sent your way around how we persuade school leadership to engage with LEANS and so on. But specifically, these two questions are essentially asking, how do we reach into schools? So the schools that already took part in the research are kind of like-minded, already engaged with, and wanting to engage with neurodiversity. So how do we approach those schools that are feeling curriculum pressure, demands on the system, teachers that are struggling to fit all of their expectations into their week, and perhaps for whom neurodiversity is less of a priority? I wonder if you had any thoughts on that, Chris.
Yeah, I think the settings where perhaps neurodiversity is less of a priority would potentially also be those where special education needs is less of a priority. And so that is about a mindset that's just sort of about our window of the world, and actually it's taking a step back and thinking about actually by investing in such an important topic, we will actually lose some of that reactivity. So that's reacting to pupils falling out because they don't understand, they don't have that level of awareness. It's the reactivity of having to respond to parents who might have seen something happen with one pupil to their son or daughter, and again, because that awareness isn't there, in terms of how the pupils can develop their own independence, and in terms of their own skill sets and understanding themselves better and their peers, and giving them putting the trust in them to be able to do that as well. So I think it's about just flipping it on its head a bit, because yeah, it would need that initial sort of investment, but the benefits that it could bring, and some of the level of the dialogue that could take place in those classrooms, are those that they are the sort of the moments that kids will go home and remember. They are the activities that they'll recall at the end of the year. They are memorable. That is meaningful experiential learning. So it's just about seeing the potential and having a slightly different mindset towards it.
Thank you, Chris. Oh, no, I thought I saw a hand up, but it's not a hand. Right. So, question for Alyssa. So, someone was wondering whether the LEANS program has support from neurodivergent people more generally, not just those that were involved in the design. And I wondered if you wanted to say something about our consultation phase.
Yes. The person who could best speak to this is not actually on the panel. PhD student Risha Zahir led consultation studies for us near the end of 2020. And we had a couple of different types of consultation study, one of which was a large public survey open to anyone, but particularly trying to recruit neurodivergent people and people who had links to the education community. That that study did not have people look at the full resource pack because we hadn't developed it yet. Instead, they were looking at more like outline, plan level type content about what we planned to cover, the learning objectives, and critical definitions, like how we define neurodiversity. And it asked people how acceptable, and I think how useful they found different parts of that content. I know we had over 100 responses. I'm afraid I do not remember exactly how many, but overall was finding quite high acceptability ratings and general levels of support from the community. The majority of people who took part in that public survey did identify themselves as being neurodivergent. So we took that broadly as a mandate that what we were doing was by and large acceptable. And continued to develop the ideas we were working on at that point. We also did some consultation studies with teachers, both trainee teachers and experienced teachers who said they had low knowledge of neurodiversity. Those were focusing much more on the what do you as a teacher need to know kind of questions. Does this draft resource answer your questions? Risha also led a diversity consultation study, which was smaller and interview-based, that was looking at our plans for the LEANS characters and stories to try to make sure that we were getting good representation of ethnicity and different genders. And we have a non-binary character as one of our main kids. And just to make sure that we were being as sensitive as we could within the constraints of not being able to include everybody and everything. So thank you very much to Risha for leading on those studies for us.
Thank you, Alyssa. We've just got a few minutes to go, so I'm going to pick out one or two more questions. We have got through a lot of them. Just to reiterate, I'm sorry if we don't get to your question. This one I'm going to send to Sarah McGeown, I think. The questioner is wondering if there are other resources on the topic of neurodiversity in schools that LEANS supports or recommends. It's a relatively new field, and it's great to have an idea what resources are already available. Could you say anything about that, Sarah?
So I think Alyssa might be able to answer this question better than I can, but I know as part of LEANS, we also compiled, for example, a list of books. I saw in the chat people talking about books, for example, by the author Al McNichol, and I think there's lots of different ways in which we can, for children and young people to learn about the topic of neurodiversity as well, whether that's through fiction books which exist or other types of programs too. I'm not sure if Alyssa has any specific program. There's a link in the chat now I can see to some of those different resources.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry to pop you on the spot. Alyssa, did you want to add anything?
Just that we do have a whole long list of community suggested resources. Those are on the more resources section of our website. So stuff that's not included in the main resource download. You can just navigate to the page and click and get these documents. In addition to those community suggestions about books and web pages and other stuff, we've also got a suggested reading list about neurodiversity and also lists of organizations working in this area that might be a particularly good resource for families. There's a list for the UK and a separate list for the Republic of Ireland there. Our more resources page, link is in the chat.
Great. And Alyssa, I'm going to stay with you if that's okay for a quick question about whether the LEANS content would be suitable for use in specialist schools. So classrooms that are filled with neurodivergent pupils.
Okay, this is a really good question. And as the creators of LEANS, we can only advise, we can't prescribe. And I think that some of the important considerations you would want to focus on here are about the ability levels that are present in a particular classroom. For example, what is the level of literacy like? A number of activities are set up for pupils to work in small groups. Do you have enough children in the class to divide people into groups? Is that going to be feasible sort of socially and cognitively for them to do that? If it needs more adult support to happen, do you have enough staff members to help it happen? So I would really encourage anyone who's asking that question to look first at the resources with a very practical eye to say, is this kind of stuff going to be feasible for a particular class of children and young people in a specialist setting? And for some classes, the answer may be yes, and for other classes, it might be that it's just not going to work for that particular group of children, or maybe next year, but not this year. So you really are going to have to consider those different components. Take a look through the handbook and assess whether it's realistic for a particular group of young people. And if it is realistic, would they like it? If you don't think they'll like it, don't do it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alyssa. So I'm just going to take a punt on a question. The questioner has said, big question at the beginning of the question. This is for anyone who would like to give it a go. And they said, has creating LEANS taught you anything about learning or created bigger questions for you about how you view any specific pedagogic theory? Ooh, I don't feel like I know anything about pedagogic theory, but I do think that we have got some insights from LEANS in terms of, you know, what it means to build a curriculum resource. But anyway, put your hand up if you would like to have a punt at that big question. Yes, Sarah, wonderful, thank you.
Big question. I have to say, being involved in LEANS really made me think about sort of like older concepts like learning styles, and it's massively challenged this sort of like mindset that I had from a few years ago. Actually, we all have different learning styles, and actually it's way more complicated than that. So learning styles for me are now in the bin, and it's more to do with sort of like the validity of every single brain, and that we are all valuable, and I really like that.
Anyone else got any thoughts on pedagogic theory? I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
I'm not sure I've got anything to say about theory. Thank you to my friend who asked this question. But as we got more and more into LEANS, and especially as we were revising and restructuring and throwing away big chunks of stuff, I really reflected more how little of teaching about neurodiversity is explicitly about neurodiversity. That we got more and more indirect and also more and more mundane, if that makes sense, in terms of really digging down into daily interaction stuff. Like I see something happen in the classroom and my immediate reaction is that it's not fair and I'm going to start getting wound up about it. And that if we're really trying to convince people to change their beliefs and actions, that we're really working on a lot of that more emotional stuff and really fine-grained day-to-day interaction. And it ends up not being explicitly about neurodiversity at all, but much more generally about trying to respect others and act with patience and truly listen to others, which I know sounds very touchy-feely, but this is about people's lives, and life is pretty touchy-feely. So yes, I think that indirectness was a big thing that I learned and that really surprised me. And it wouldn't surprise me if that pattern holds true in terms of other big ideas that we may want to change people's minds about or introduce to people at different levels in the educational system, all the way through up to university.
Wonderful, thank you, Alyssa. Oh, Sarah, did you want to? No, okay.
I'm not hogging it. Well, I think all I would add is actually that LEANS, one of the things about LEANS that I've learned the most about is actually the importance of community and belonging. And actually, it's not necessarily directly related to any pedagogy as such, but I do think that if a child or an adult, anybody, feels accepted for who they are and supported for being who they are, then they are going to be able to learn. And I think sometimes school structures and the way things are can produce the opposite of that. So I just think, you know, in terms of creating kind communities and actually genuinely inclusive communities that aren't tick box exercises, I think LEANS can actually, I think it would benefit everybody in the school. So I don't know if that's actually related, but
A wonderful note to end on, Sarah. Absolutely perfect. And I just want to wrap up by saying thank you to Alyssa, to all of our panel, Sarah, Chris, to everyone who asked brilliant questions. We did get through most of them, and I hope we touched on all of the topics that you were interested in as well. We will also be picking up some of your recommendations that are embedded in your questions, so we're really grateful for those. Thank you for everyone saying nice things about LEANS. We're very proud of it, and it's nice that you think it's good too. And unless Alyssa wants to say something, Alyssa, would you like to say a word?
I would just like to add that while you're seeing a few of us today, this project represents the dedication and professional experience and lived experience and time of a really long list of people. There's a lot of people who've been very good friends to the project who I have never even met, because thanks to the pandemic, we have done almost all of this through video calls. So I would like to thank the entire team and everyone who believed that we could make this and that it might make schools better. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you very much, everyone.